Previously, I talked about preparing a little for the British Mathematical Olympiad, and that video did pretty well, but in reality, all that took second priority to another bit of math, because this year, I also plan to apply to 3 math camps, and hopefully get into one so I have something cool to do over the summer. My targets this time were SUMaC at Stanford, Canada-USA Math Camp, this year hosted at Champlain College, Vermont, and last but not least, PROMYS of Boston University. These are all highly competitive, admitting only tens of applicants each year. Last year I applied to SUMaC and PROMYS and was rejected from both. If you didn't know, camps like these require you to submit full written solutions to a test, which is typically released around 6 weeks before the application deadline. These have 6 to 8 problems and go by many names: admissions exam, problem set, qualifying quiz. What is in common though is that they all take a lot of hours to hopefully solve, and are all designed without any specialized knowledge in mind. So they're as accessible to seasoned competitors as they are to someone who's just good at math and was interested and decided to give them a go. However, it is good if you know any heavy machinery from competitions or anything outside of school. While the camps state that you don't need to solve all the problems to get accepted, as an international student especially, I think it's important that I can try and knock all of them out and also give really good write-ups. Little note, before making this video, I reached out to all 3 camps to see if I could use their problems in this video, and PROMYS said no, which is a shame because there were some good problems in there. But oh well, all 3 of these sets have their stars. Also, as a disclaimer, just because I got into some of these camps doesn't mean I'm qualified to tell you what you should do. I'm just saying what I did, alright? Some of the math that I talk about could even be wrong, for all I know. I've linked all the problems and the solutions down in the description if you want to have a look-see, and corrections would of course be most welcome. And with that, let's get started. SUMaC applications opened first, and I must have forgotten to sign up for updates because I only noticed when randomly checking in on the website, so it was a good thing that I caught it early on December 23rd. It was past 10 at night, so I only had a brief look at the exam before going to sleep. The next day, I got ready to rumble. First, I got problem 1 out of the way, which they probably set pretty easy, almost as an appetizer. Next, after trying the rest of the problems to see which ones looked interesting, I decided to check out problem 2, which should be easy since it's just number 2, right? Problem 2 is, in my opinion, the most difficult problem from my application cycle, and had by far the longest proof, consisting of multiple definitions, lemmas, and claims, all that. But it didn't start out looking that way. Let's discuss the setup for part A first. You're in a dark room with a table and 4 coins arranged in a circle. Your goal is to make the coins show all heads or all tails, at which point you will be let out. Since the room is so dark, you can't see which face the coins are showing, but you can tell by feeling them. Each turn, you're allowed to feel just 2 coins and have the choice to flip any set of them. So both, just 1, or none at all. Seems easy enough, right? Just make 1 pair heads, and then the next turn make the opposite pair heads. Here's the twist though. After each turn, the table rotates a random amount, so you don't know which coins you accessed last turn. So if you keep trying the same strategy, the table could just rage bait you and keep giving you the coins that you had accessed already, leaving you to be stuck forever. The question now asks, what is the minimum number of turns to guarantee your escape? After some experimentation, I found that the only way you can guarantee a win is if you know you've reached this state, where flipping any pair of opposite coins works. So how can we get here? The problem is that there's always 1 coin that you can't be sure to access. You can access a pair of opposite coins and then guarantee 1 more by accessing a pair of adjacent coins, but you could keep getting unlucky and not landing on that very last one. So you would first think that you couldn't necessarily pin down what the state is. However, I realized that I could use this to my advantage. If we make 3 coins the same using the 2 turns, and we still don't win, that means we have 1 coin as the odd one out. So now we know exactly what our state is. Next, we can feel an opposite pair of coins. If we find the odd one out, we win. If not, we flip just 1 of our coins. This once again guarantees we know our state, which is 2 pairs of different adjacent coins like so. Now it's easy. We choose a pair of adjacent coins and flip them both. If they're the same, then we win. Otherwise, check this out. We reach the winning state. If we haven't won yet, then we know we're in this winning state, allowing us to escape in 5 turns. Of course, all that wasn't mathematically rigorous. There's nothing about how this is the fastest solution. It took maybe 15 minutes of playing around. But I was pretty sure that this was right, and decided to come up with the proof later, moving straight on to part B. Now you have 8 coins on the table and a friend, so you can feel 4 of the coins at once. Once again, what is the minimum amount of turns to guarantee escape? Sounds not too bad, right? Once again, we know that this state guarantees victory on the next turn. We can also easily reach the odd one out state as before, using this binary masking kind of technique, where you select alternating groups of 4, then 2, then 1. But try as I might, from there I couldn't get the coins to the magic winning state. But as night fell, I found myself time and time again returning to one idea. 8 coins is just 4 coins times 2. It seemed like the only way. I could access twice as many coins per turn. So if only I could make each pair of opposite coins the same, then I could solve it that way. And so the concept of asymmetry was born. Let's use binary to write out our state. If we slice it into halves and compare them, we can find the asymmetry of our state, more specifically by taking the bitwise exclusive OR operation. This has now 4 bits. Notice that if we rotate our coin state, our asymmetry rotates by an equal amount. Now the key is that since we can access 4 coins at once, it's the same as accessing 2 asymmetry bits at once, since to figure out each asymmetry bit corresponds to knowing the faces of an opposite pair of coins. Sound familiar? That's right, it's the exact same puzzle as part A. By the next day, I had arrived at this algorithm, which would guarantee solving the puzzle. This is where things started to go slightly off course. I now had a valid algorithm to solve the puzzle for 8 coins, and in fact we can use induction to solve this puzzle for any power of 2 coins. However, is it the method that ends in the least amount of moves? That sounds like a difficult problem, and sometimes to deal with a difficult problem, you have to be optimistic. That's what I did. I fully believe that you have to first solve asymmetry before you could do anything else, and try to prove it. In essence, we have to show that it's impossible to guarantee winning the game from an asymmetric state, even if we know precisely what the asymmetric state is. The gist is that you have to access 1 coin out of every opposite pair, otherwise you may not catch the asymmetric pair, but then you don't know if you're going to get the right coins. There is an edge case that I realized needed considering, which is when the number of heads and tails are equal, but I managed to capture the whole proof in quite a lengthy lemma. So that's it, right? Well, I certainly thought so, and had my already lengthy proof down in just 3 short days. But as I was rereading it and reviewing it and thinking it over, I found a flaw in my strategy. In running the solve steps down to the very end, we were in theory wasting precious turns, as we could be detecting asymmetry right in the middle. We didn't need all of those turns to do that. So I was thrown off, but still had time for a rewrite. But oh no, not only did I realize that what I just did doesn't actually improve the algorithm's worst case scenario, which is what the question's actually asking for, I found an actual speedup, which required yet another rewrite. And that speedup is, in the first turn, we can manually give our state 1 symmetric pair and 1 asymmetric pair, at least 1. And then that just narrows the solution space way down and halves the number of solve steps needed, which is the main bottleneck in our algorithm's complexity. Actually, one final check. The purpose of our new first step is to take care of any potential symmetry that might exist before we start solving the asymmetry. So what happens if we try to solve the asymmetry on an already symmetric state? Well, our algorithm has this recursive structure such that if something holds for 2 to the n-1 coins, it'll hold for 2 to the n coins. So all we need to do is take a closer look at our 4 coin solution. Our asymmetry allows us to prove that 5 moves is optimal. The first 2 eliminate the asymmetries of 0, 0 and 1, 1, which is the most we can do in those turns. And then we must have at least 3 moves to finish it off. As the symmetric state will be made asymmetric, this settles the problem of starting with a winning state. It makes it asymmetric and then symmetric again. If you solve a problem really thoroughly, it often lends itself to cool generalizations which you can consider and write up, and can be really nice inclusions in your solutions. In this case, I found 2 generalizations. First, using the recursive property, I found a general solution for 2 to the power of n coins, where n is greater than or equal to 2. Next, I also realized that you can in fact solve this problem without touching the faces at all, and just doing moves completely blindly, shuffling through the asymmetry combinations, and trying every configuration, which is actually insane. It's a lot more inefficient, but somehow it works. So that was really nice to put in. If that problem didn't feel that hard when I was talking about it just now, well, trust me, during the writing process, I made so many mistakes and new discoveries, most of which I didn't even talk about, that it made the process just extremely tedious. I spent nearly a third of my entire solutions document dedicated to this problem, which is a lot, considering I didn't even use any diagrams, which obviously take up a lot of space. So this was a very involved process, and I'm very happy with how my final proof turned out. Definitely one of the top 10 things I've written. The night I first opened the problems, problem 5 instantly stood out, but as I mentioned, I didn't get too much luck with it on the first day and went on with problem 2 instead. But after finishing problems 3 and 4, I was back. An ant starts at the lower left corner of a quarter infinite grid. At each step, one ant on the grid can duplicate itself and move one copy up and one copy to the right, assuming both of the cells that the ant's copies move into are already empty. Is it possible for the ants to completely vacate the yellow region? Problem 5 turned out to be a whole different beast. It's one of those where you either get it or you don't. There's no clear way in. After playing around with ant moves for about 20 minutes, I was convinced that the answer was no, it's impossible. The solution seemed so simple that if it existed, I would have found it already. But that fact also turned this problem into a monster, because instead of just finding one valid sequence, I would have to disprove all possible sequences of moves. I had ideas of eliminating certain types of sequences because they would lead to some bad or impossibility, whatever, but I decided to leave that to a last resort. It seemed too complicated. I decided to try look at invariance instead. As the name suggests, an invariant is a property that stays the same no matter what you do, and if the desired state we want doesn't satisfy that invariant, then it's impossible to reach that state. One of the easiest examples is proving you can't cover an 8x8 grid with two opposite corners cut off using 1x2 dominoes, without gaps or bits extending off the grid, of course. If you color the grid like a chessboard, you'll see that each domino covers exactly one black and one white square, so the difference between the number of covered black and white squares is 0, an invariant. However, if you look at our entire grid, the difference is 2, which is not 0, so it's impossible. I finally came up with my invariant with a bit of magic. I was thinking of this problem in Chinese, and describing the duplication process inspired me to use fractions. Let's give the starting ant a weight of 1. Each time an ant duplicates, both of its offspring will have half the weight of the parent, so this keeps the total weight of all ants invariant to 1. Let's fill out the grid with weights. If we assign coordinates x, y to each cell, then since each duplication increases one of your coordinates, for an ant to be on that cell, it must have gone through x plus y duplications, leading to the following pattern. Now the sum of weights for the entire grid isn't difficult to find, it's 4. What about the yellow region? It's 3. So for the ants to completely vacate the yellow region, since we need the weights of all occupied cells to add to 1, the ants have to be in every single cell outside the yellow region, an infinite number. So it's indeed impossible. And that was a beautiful problem. By this time, 2 weeks had already passed since I opened the problem set, and it was now January 6th. The same day which I started my application for last year. I had already 5 problems down, and it was looking good for time. What I want to talk about now is my write-up. I went digital all the way with LaTeX on Overleaf for my math and a drawing app for my diagrams. LaTeX is pretty easy to learn if you're interested, and there's enough resources on the internet to do anything you want to do, pretty much. And I didn't mind having too many diagrams, just enough so that the reader didn't have to visualize anything whatsoever as they were going through my solution, so it'd be really easy to tell if it was right or wrong. These solutions are going to be really long because the problems are long and they're difficult. So I tried my best to also keep the reader signposted and tell them what we've just done, where we're going, and where we're at now. So just for example, especially in problem 2. I think a pretty important thing is to not waste time after solving a problem before writing your solution, as you're going to find out, because they take time to refine and polish. Last but not least, I had a stroke of inspiration. I searched how to put clickable links in LaTeX and made a content section at the front of my write-up to really make this stand out. Check it out. Apart from the admissions exam, SUMaC also requires 3 essays, as well as 1 recommendation letter, which I asked my math teacher to do. Since the essays have a word limit, unlike the other 2 programs I applied to, I started them quite early before the deadline. There's also a bunch of family information and extracurricular information, and that takes a while to fill out. I also recorded and submitted the optional video essay on the last day, and in total I would say I spent at least 60 hours on this application. Canada-USA admissions opened in the middle of SUMaC on January 13th, and unlike SUMaC, the qualifying quiz is public on their website, so anyone can go and check those problems out. I found the quiz roughly the same difficulty as the admissions exam, but much more balanced in terms of the individual problems, so it was easier to ignore the ordering and just tackle whichever one I felt like doing each session. The goal was all of them anyways. I also found the qualifying quiz to be the most fun out of the 3 problem sets I had to do, but that was mainly because of my experience. Because for all of the problems, well, nearly all of them, I found large mistakes in my initial solutions that made me go back and have to revise them, which often led to new and exciting things to learn about. Canada-USA Mathcamp hosts their own live Art of Problem Solving Math Jam each year to talk about their qualifying quiz. So since that's happening only a few days, or even 1 day after this video comes out, I don't know, I'll only talk briefly about my 2 favorite problems. First off is problem 5b. I consider this disjoint from 5a because even though these share slight similarities in their setup, the solutions are just completely different. You have 2 displays, which can each show a number from 0 to n-1. So it's like a 2-digit number display in base n. It starts at 0, 0, and each step you can increment either of the counters. If a counter at n-1 is incremented, it goes back to 0. Certain sequences of n squared minus 1 increments will allow you to cycle through all n squared 2-digit numbers exactly once. The problem asks, what are the possible ending numbers for such sequences? Since we have 2 degrees of freedom for this number, the first thing I did was create a graph of all states, like so, which looks like a square grid. Now each sequence of increments will have to go through all the vertices. We can first narrow down the possible ending vertices to a diagonal. Each step increases our digit sum by 1 modulo n, so n squared minus 1 steps will mean our ending digit sum is n minus 1 mod n, which corresponds to the vertices on the main diagonal opposite our starting position. Now the question is whether it's possible to construct valid paths that actually reach all of these vertices. I reached this first conclusion quite quickly, but from there I was struggling for a long while, drawing random paths to try and notice something. I kept going back to it while solving other problems, but made no progress until this was the last one left. And so I just decided to write a quick program to brute force all the paths to see what happens with some small values of n. I noticed something quite peculiar. When n is even, we can reach all the vertices on the diagonal, but when n is odd, we can only reach every other vertex on the diagonal. Why on earth was this the case? Suppose we want to end our path on this vertex. Then, except for the end, each vertex will have exactly 1 outgoing edge, and except for the start, each vertex will have exactly 1 ingoing edge. Consider this vertex. It needs an ingoing edge, but that can't come from the end, since, well, our path ends there. So it must come from that vertex. If we look at the next vertex on the diagonal, then since it also needs an ingoing edge, it must come from the vertex above. Similarly, this can be done to figure out the outgoing edges for the vertices on the main diagonal. Next, let's look at another arbitrary diagonal. Suppose this vertex has an edge going down. Then, since this vertex needs an ingoing edge, we need another edge going down, and so on, and so on, and so on. So all the vertices on this diagonal have edges going down. If instead one vertex has an edge going right, then by similar logic, all the vertices on that diagonal will have edges going right. So all diagonals except for the main diagonal will have edges going in the same direction. So now that we have these constraints on edges, how do we make sure that they actually link up to form a complete Hamiltonian path to the desired ending vertex? As we can see here, it doesn't always happen. If we have an ending vertex, the edges from that diagonal are fixed, and the only thing we can vary now is the number of right and down edges in the remaining diagonals. Let's track the value of our counter representing the horizontal axis, which we can call the x-coordinate, at each time we reach the ending diagonal. Suppose there are big X diagonals with rightward edges, not containing the ending diagonal. The ordering doesn't matter. Then, the first time we hit our ending diagonal, we will have x-coordinate x1 equal to x. What happens on the ending diagonal depends on our x-coordinate. Suppose our prospective ending vertex has x-coordinate d. Then if our current x-coordinate is greater than d, then nothing happens on that diagonal to our x-coordinate, we just go down. And we increase by x mod n afterwards. If our x-coordinate is less than d, then we increase it by 1 before adding x mod n. And if it's exactly equal to d, then, well, our path ends. So how do we make sure that it only ends after exactly n steps, so that we reach all vertices? I.e., the sequence ends at xn. Well, it turns out that permutations save the day. Since we visit every vertex on the ending diagonal exactly once, we can think of the order in which we visit them as a permutation. The fact that permutations exhibit parity or sign is a big motivation for this, seeing as from running the program the answer depends on the parity of n. If you haven't heard of permutation parity or sign, you can think of it as the parity of the number of swaps you need to get from the identity permutation, which does absolutely nothing, to your desired permutation. It turns out that no matter how you do your swaps, the parity stays constant, and I do talk about this more in my SUMaC Writeup for problem 3. Actually, for the rest of this problem, I'll use sign instead of parity, but it's basically the same thing, just easier to write mathematically. To write out this order permutation, let's describe our tracking algorithm, which consists of 2 steps. First, we needed a little more space. After leaving the ending diagonal, we have a conditional increment, which we can write as this permutation, where we make the ending coordinate d map to 0 so the permutation is actually a permutation. Next, all elements are increased by x mod n, which we can do as this permutation. What's the parity of the order permutation? Well, since we want to visit every vertex, it's made up of a single cycle. What's the parity of a cycle? Well, we can think about swaps. First, we move 1 to its new spot, then 2 to its new spot, and then 3 to its new spot, and so on. And we see that the number of swaps taken is 1 less than the number of elements in the cycle. So the sign can be written -1 to the power of n-1. Next, the sign of the increment permutation is simple. It's once again a single cycle. Finally, let's find the sign of the increase by x permutation. We can split it up into individual cycles. The number of cycles in this permutation is the greatest common divisor between n and x. For example, if that number is 3, then starting at 0 we can only reach multiples of 3. So we need 3 cycles for the 3 possible remainders or residue classes mod 3. Each cycle has the same length, which is n over the GCD. So we can multiply the signs of the individual cycles together to get the sign of the whole permutation. Think of it as adding up the number of swaps. What we can now do is equate these signs, getting this simple looking result. Now, if you consider what happens when n is even or odd, the reason why the answer depends on parity becomes clear. When n is odd, then if you take its GCD with another number, then it has to be odd no matter what. This forces d to be even, which is exactly what the program showed. On the other hand, when n is even, no problem occurs with that. Are we done? Still no. We've only narrowed down the space of possible endings even more, but we haven't shown that our new set of potential endings are actually reachable. Thankfully, all we need now is a bit of guess and check. When n is odd, we can construct x equals 1, which we find allows us to reach all even positions. When n is even, x equals 1 once again allows us to reach all even positions, and if the ending position is odd, then x equals n minus 2 works. You can think of this as reflecting our grid. The up and right edges get swapped, and since n is even, this lets us reach new positions. That was pretty difficult, not gonna lie. I ended it only through a combination of sheer luck and some skill. However, there was a problem the advertised explicitly as hard. Problem 6. Oh no, the campers have run away with the staff's stash of cookies. A group of 15 mentors decided to try and win their cookies back, and the campers organize a game for them. The mentors are split up, and each one is given a box of either sandwich or chocolate chip cookies. Only knowing the type of cookies their box contains, each mentor must guess another mentor that has the same type of cookie. Each mentor that guesses correctly gets to keep their cookies. What is the maximum number of boxes that the mentors are guaranteed to keep, if they are allowed to strategize beforehand? Funnily enough, I found this problem the easiest when I first saw it, and it was the only one which didn't go over any revisions. You see, I decided that the mentors could follow the same strategy no matter what they received, because what was the point of changing your guess depending on what cookie you got? So my computer science knowledge came in once again, and I did some graph theory, looking at the graph formed by the mentors' guesses, realizing that only odd cycles guaranteed one cookie in the worst case, and so arriving at the answer of 5 boxes of cookies, making 5 cycles of 3 mentors. That was the end of the problem, and I submitted. However, that was wrong, and I only realized after talking to some friends from Yale Mathcamp who also applied, after the application closed, of course. So why was this? It turns out that changing your strategy depending on what you get can provide advantages, however it makes our analysis way more complicated. Instead of a graph with 15 edges, we have 30. When we then assign cookies to our vertices, we split them into 2 sets. The number of incorrect guesses is going to be at most half of the edges between the 2 sets, and this turns into a problem related to minimizing something called the directed cut of this graph. Going on Wikipedia, I found a theorem by Edwards and Erdos that finds a lower bound which turns out to work for us in this problem. But the proof of that seems way too hard to go into one of these problems. It's not completely out of the question, just unreasonably difficult, so I'll not talk about it and see if there's a better solution that appears in their official math jam. The rest of this Mathcamps application is really chill. You fill in some answers for some questions about your math background, and you also list a reference, which may or may not be asked to answer a few questions about you. Finally, since PROMYS asked me to not talk about the problems, I can't say much, except I did spend significantly less time on the problem set, which also felt quite a bit easier than last year. Although I had some nice solutions, I really don't know the style they're looking for in my write-up, and ultimately I was rejected. It is what it is. Of course, you've seen the thumbnail, which is probably why you clicked on this video. I got rejected from PROMYS, but I was accepted into SUMaC Residential for Algebraic Topology, as well as Canada USA Mathcamp. As an international student, these 2 programs are some of the hardest I could get accepted into, and I'm extremely honored for it. After a very hard decision, I decided to attend SUMaC this summer and apply to Canada USA Mathcamp for next year. I won't go into my decision because it depends heavily on your personal circumstances, and there is no well-defined heuristic function that can just tell you which camp is better. I mean, I'm going to both anyways, well hopefully if I get accepted into Canada USA next year. And all in all, these applications were a lot of struggle and a lot of fun, and if you're into this sort of thing, I would highly recommend applying to some math camp, because, well, even if you don't get in, the process of solving these problems is already extremely rewarding. Although 3 math camps might be a bit too much at once. I'll admit I spent a lot of hours not just at home but also in school during lessons, sneakily working through the problems on my iPad. I even dreamed about that path problem once with the 2 number counters. Yeah, there was an exam the day after Canada USA Mathcamp deadline, which I couldn't revise for because I was busy finishing my write-ups and answering all the question prompts, and I submitted around 9:30 p.m. So I had to go to sleep after. But I still managed to pass with a bit of on-the-day cramming, so we win these!